Foreign travel, pressure at home. What President Boakai's California Peace Award means for Liberia. President Joseph Nyuma. Boakai's April 2026 trip to the United States has opened a revealing debate in Liberia, not over whether peace should be honored, but over what kind of recognition truly matters when citizens are under economic strain. The administration presents the visit as a working mission that includes high level meetings and diaspora engagement. Critics see something else, an expensive presidential journey built around a university based award ceremony at a time when ordinary Liberians are asking harder questions about public spending, inflation, and results. The first point that needs clarification is simple but important. The Peace Leadership Award President Boakai is scheduled to receive is real, and it is being issued by a legitimate institution. It comes from the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution at California State University, Sacramento, which the university describes as a center established in 1996 to provide conflict resolution, training, research, and intervention services. Sacramento State's own materials confirm that Boakai is the distinguished keynote speaker and honoree for the 34th Annual Africa Peace Awards dinner on April 25th, 2026. This is separate from other similarly named awards, such as the Africa Peace Award issued by Accord, based in South Africa, or those issued by the African Peace Foundation. But legitimacy is not the same thing as official continental authority. This is not an African Union honor, not an ECOWAS state distinction, and not a prize conferred by an intergovernmental African institution. It is an academic and civic award hosted by a U.S. university center focused on African peace and conflict issues. That does not make it fake. It does mean Liberians should understand exactly what it is: respectable university recognition, not a sovereign African commendation. That distinction matters because governments often rely on symbolism, while citizens live inside material realities. Sacramento State's own presidential communication says the April 25th dinner is a paid event, with general admission priced at $95 and tables sold for $1,200, and that precedes support CAPECR. In other words, this is not a state ceremony bearing a public prize purse. It is part of a university conference and awards program that also functions as a fundraiser for the center's work. Whilst it is honorable for President Boakai to contribute to a U.S. university fundraiser, such gesture leaves ordinary Liberians, especially students of the University of Liberia, bewildered that their president would be patronizing a U.S. university when the state-owned university lie in ruins. The California State University's record also shows that President Boakai is not the first high-profile African political figure to be honored in this setting. In 2025, Sacramento State publicly reported that Peter Obi received the Peace Leadership Award from the same center. That history adds credibility to the award, but it also reinforces the point that the honor belongs to an academic network of recognition, not to the official hierarchy of African state awards. The Boakai administration, for its part, is not describing the trip as award tourism. In its official press release, the executive mansion says the president is on a working visit from April 22nd to April 30th, 2026, and states that the delegation will engage in high-level meetings to strengthen bilateral relations and cooperation in governance, investment, and human capacity development. However, there is no formal presidential itinerary that clearly verifies the claim, thus lacking transparency. The mansion also listed members of the delegation, including the Ministers of Information and Agriculture, the Inspector General of Police, and other officials. That defense would carry more force if the public had before it a clear, measurable ledger of outcomes. What exact investment deals are being targeted? What new financing is being pursued? What projects are expected to be agreed upon? What diaspora commitments are expected to be formalized beyond ceremonial appearances? The problem for the government is not that travel can never produce value, especially given limited practical benefits from previous travels. It is that in a fiscally constrained country, value has to be shown, not assumed. On that point, Public skepticism is understandable. The timing makes the skepticism sharper. Liberia's own Ministry of Finance says the IMF confirmed 5.1% economic growth for 2025 entering 2026, which the government understandably touts as evidence of resilience. But growth headlines do not erase the pressures households feel from rising prices, weak purchasing power, and external shocks. Reuters reported just days ago that the Middle East conflict and aid cuts are pushing more African countries toward IMF support and raising fuel and fertilizer costs across the continent. For many Liberians, that macroeconomic contradiction is the issue. Official optimism above, household anxiety below. That is why the political optics of foreign travel matter. Front page Africa's analysis of Liberia's 2026 spending plan noted that the legislature's allocation of $51.7 million is nearly 4 times the agriculture budget of $13.7 million, while the legislature's travel, goods, and services line rose to $14.6 million. Those numbers, added to similar allotments to the executive, do not prove that this particular US trip was improper, but they do explain why Liberians are becoming less patient with elite travel narratives in a time of scarcity. When the public sees large travel budgets alongside hospitals short of supplies and agriculture underfunded, even legitimate international engagement begins to look detached from national need. The contradiction is made worse by the administration's own rhetoric. President Boakai has recently insisted that he has no apology for doing what he considers right for the Liberian people, even as criticism has grown around the costs and optics of official travel. That is a defensible political stance only if the government can demonstrate that its travel culture is disciplined, necessary, and productive. Otherwise, the message risks sounding like moral certainty without fiscal proof. None of this means the president should never travel. Diplomacy matters. Diaspora engagement matters. International visibility can matter. Liberia does need development partners, investment channels, and academic goodwill. The question is whether the government has adequately aligned those goals with the principles of austerity, accountability, and prioritization that it has publicly claimed to uphold. A poor country cannot treat every invitation as a strategic necessity. Statecraft requires choosing which journeys produce real returns and which merely produce applause. There is also a more subtle danger here. When governments facing domestic criticism lean too heavily on international recognition, they can begin to confuse external prestige with internal legitimacy. These are not the same thing. A standing ovation in Sacramento does not lower food prices in Monrovia. A plaque does not fund agricultural transformation. A keynote speech does not substitute for medicines in clinics or discipline in public expenditure. External honors may elevate an image. They do not automatically validate a governing record. To be fair, Boakai's award may reflect real elements of his public life. Reuters reported in 2025 that he launched a notable national reconciliation campaign, publicly apologizing to victims of Liberia's civil wars and honoring slain former presidents. That kind of gesture helps explain why an academic peace center might choose to recognize him. But even that strengthens, rather than weakens, the central public question. If the presidency wants this award to be seen as meaningful, it must show that the same seriousness applied to symbolic reconciliation is being applied to economic stewardship at home. The most responsible conclusion, then, is neither cynical dismissal nor blind celebration. President Boakai is receiving a credible academic peace award from a real university center. That much is true, but the award is not an official African state honor. It does not appear to carry prize money, and the event itself is part of a university fundraising and public engagement program. The administration's decision to frame the trip as investment diplomacy can only stand if accompanied by transparent reporting on costs and documented outcomes. Without that, Liberians will continue to judge the visit not by the prestige of the ceremony, but by the distance between international visibility and domestic relief. In the end, this debate is bigger than one trip. It is about the ethics of governance in a country where symbolism is cheap, but public trust is expensive. The Liberian people do not need to be told that recognition is good. They need to be shown that recognition is useful. Until then, the real test of leadership will remain what it has always been, not what a president receives abroad, but what his government delivers at home. My View is a continuing series where I share informed commentary on a wide range of geopolitical and socio-economic topics. If you found today's discussion helpful, please follow, subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I invite you to explore other My View episodes available online. Until we meet again, goodbye.